I know you're probably ready for a break from C corporations, so time to move into S corps. We've got two lessons here. Our first is going to deal with the eligibility and election, and the second is going to deal with calculations. Now, will we mention intermingling components of each? Yeah, sure. Are we going to talk about calculations in this lesson? Of course. Are we going to talk about eligibility and election in the next one? Totally. They go hand in hand with each other. This is kind of just part one. The second one's part two. But there's a lot of points that you just got to know. So I suggest doing these two lessons back to back. I mean, they are back to back, but if you got time to do a second one after, definitely recommend doing that. Let's dive into our learning objectives and see what we have specifically for ourselves today. It may seem like we have a lot of objectives, but a lot of them go hand in hand. So first off, we want to recall eligible shareholders for an S-Corp. Obviously, this is not a C-Corp. C-Corps are a lot more standard. These are the ones you find in the open market, and most types of entities, individuals, taxpayers can buy into those. However, S-Corps, we're going to see are much different. To super broad explain what's going on here, you have a C-Corp, it can elect to become an S-Corp. If you don't know anything about S-Corps, that's what we're dealing with essentially. We also want to see what the eligibility requirements are for an S-Corp in order for that C-Corp to become an S-Corp. That's going to be important as well. We want to explain the procedures to make a valid S-Corp election for tax purposes. So again, who can be an S-Corp shareholder? What do we need to do to make sure that our C-Corp can elect to become an S-Corp effectively and just practically with IRS rules? We also want to identify situations in which the S-Corp status would be revoked or terminated, essentially if you breach any of these eligibility criteria. We also want to calculate separately stated items. This is going to be super important. This is something that appears a lot on the exam, Sims, multiple choice questions. So whenever you hear anything about separately stated, make sure, especially paying attention to that. We want to make sure that we also analyze the accumulated adjustments account, which, to put that in simple terms, that is essentially just the retained earnings account, but for an S-Corp. It's a little more complex than that, but that's a great way of thinking about it. And the other adjustments account for an S-Corp. We also want to analyze that accumulated earnings and profits account when an S-Corp becomes an S-Corp from a C-Corp. There are going to be changes, because you obviously can't just change from one type of an entity to another without being some considerations to be had. We also want to analyze components of the S-Corp's income or deductions to determine the classification as ordinary business income or loss or separately stated items. That is going to be something we will see. The separately stated items essentially are items that flow through the S-Corp and go to the individual taxpayer, the shareholders, whereas just ordinary business income or loss items will actually go on that 1120S, the actual form for the S-Corp. So this is a flow-through entity, just like partnerships are flow-through entities. However, some items are going to remain at the S-Corp level. Some items will be separately stated, meaning they're separately stated and stated on the individual shareholder's tax return. Lastly, we want to recall factors that can cause the built-in gains tax. This is something where if you've got appreciated property went up in value while you were C-Corp, and then you elect to become an S-Corp, there's going to be a special tax when you eventually sell that, because you don't want, or the IRS doesn't want, maybe you want this, it would make sense if you do, the IRS doesn't want you to be a C-Corp, have property that appreciates in value, and when it appreciates and you sell it, that will result in tax. They don't want you becoming an S-Corp to then sell it and then not get taxed on that, because S-Corps are not subject to double taxation like C-Corps are. We'll dive through that and all the other advantageous effects of becoming an S-Corp, as well as others, when we get into our material. I don't want to keep you too much longer, I know. Seems like a lot of learning objectives, but all of these will go hand in hand. We're going to make sure you understand this and be able to get as many points as possible from any S-Corp talk throughout the exam. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.